another interesting comment about the holographic projector. How does this take place? How is holographic projection done? I mean, how do they do it? I mean, where's the projector? You know, if we're living in a holographic universe, where's the projector, and how are we able to see this? How are we able to see this hologram and decode it? Anybody have any ideas on how that's possible? You know,
well, satellites in space that help project these images through white lasers, I understand. One thing.
Well, that is very true. That when they did the 9/11 thing, and they probably did use projectors from space to create those holograms. And you've probably all heard of Project Blue Book, which has been talked about for years, where the government's going to use holographic projectors to simulate the returning of Christ and all his UFOs coming to planet Earth. You know, that's supposed to be the great illusion showing that Jesus Christ is returning to Earth and is going to wipe out all the bad guys and all that stuff. Well, that's, you know, you've probably heard that story. Well, that would be done by a holographic projector, just like they used in 9/11. But my question is, how in the world is our entire life? I mean, everything that we live. I mean, we can have these holographic projectors within our reality, in our cause-effect reality, but how in the world does our cause and effect matrix world get produced? Where does that come from? How is that being done? Now, any thoughts on that? I mean, what is the original of the original? We're living in a holographic universe. Where is the projectors for that? Any ideas?
Well, I would say agreement has a lot to do with it. You start with agreement, and then people add on to it. The controllers add on their 2 cents worth, you know, with their technology and all that. But I mean, if you don't agree to what you see, you know, you see it, but it really doesn't exist in true reality. So the true reality we call the is, or this all isness, true universes. I mean, it's an isness. It's not a projection of any sort. And once you agree to that, once you align yourself with that, you see things for what they really are and not just an illusion. That's one view.
Well, the question is, how does this? I mean, we do know that we're living in a cause-effect created universe, right? It obviously is created, right?
Yes.
I mean, we all agree to the fact that we're living in a created universe. Well, yes? Well,
affirmative.
Okay, now, I would submit, now I don't have any basis for knowing this, but I would think, now see what you think of this idea. What would you think if sound, you know, we've often heard of the expression, the sound and light. What would you think of the idea that the sound from the all is that is projected into our cause-effect creation is the informational image? Like, now, in order to have a holographic expression or presentation, you need an information plate and you need a laser light to shine through it. What do you think of the concept that the sound is the carrier of the information and the light from the all is the laser light that activates the sound to make the presentation of our holographic created universe.
It's a nice idea, and the brain is like a transformer, you know, and the spinal cord and all the functions of the body kind of like are projectors in themselves as well.
Well, actually, the brain is the decoder. It's the brain that decodes the information so that we can actually recognize the projection of the holograms. Now, one thing that I thought was very interesting, years ago I belonged to the the Society of Unified Science, and we were trying to find out where everything came from. And one of the things that we studied, the guy who started the club wrote a book called Nothing But Motion, and we were able to show the background universal frequency for the universe. The background universal frequency, at the last meeting I attended, somewhere around 1992 or 1994, and I can't remember exactly, but it was on the order of something like 37 megahertz or 37 trillion cycles per second. And what we were able to show was that every second there was a photon emitted into what we would call reality, or in the existence. There was the frequency of the photon generation, wherever it might be, was, well, let's just go with 37 trillion a second. And I want to talk about an article in Wonderpedia magazine. Now, David Icke brings this up. I got to give him credit for bringing this out. He says that, I brought this, and it's in his book, he says, every second, 11 million sensations crackle along the pathways in the body on their way to a highly complex structure. The brain, the human brain, is confronted with an alarming array of images, sounds, and smells, which it rigorously filters down until it is left with a manageable list of around 40. Thus, 40 sensations per second make up what we perceive as reality. I mean, and so let's just say out of those 37 trillion, or let's say it's 37, billion photons being activated every second, when the human brain is sensing, I mean, they can do this in a laboratory. They can actually measure that the body is exposed to 11 million sensations going into our brain every second. Out of the 11 million sensations of this holographic projection, we only get 40 of them. The brain narrows it down and says it only makes sense out of 40 of the impressions. So David Icke brings up the point. He says, well, how can people possibly think they know what's going on when there's 11 million sensations that are giving us information, and our brain only picks up 40 of them? That's less than 0.005% of what actually exists in the universe. And so what happens is our mind fills in the missing blanks. And so here we are, we're living in a holographic universe. We have all this holographic information being thrown at us, and our brains are deciphering only 40 of these sensory impressions every second, which is minuscule. Well, what's the problem? Since I'm running out of time, I'm gonna kind of make a long story short. What is the problem with what's going on in the world today? Well, since we live in a holographic universe and we're decoding only 40 impressions a second, and who knows what we do with that, if all we were getting was the regular impressions, life would be fine. I mean, we could get by, right? Well, anyway, here is something that I think is extremely important for everybody to know, and that is this. Has anybody ever heard of the Gnostic Christians that lived in the first few centuries AD, and maybe it's probably the 200 or 300 AD. Anybody hear of the Gnostic Christians? You've probably heard about them as being the Essenes and that sort of group of people, and they had a belief system that was slightly different from the biblical teachings. Anybody heard about the Gnostic Christians?
Sure, I knew a bishop. She was living in Northern California. She practiced that, and direct experience rather than belief based. But it's very interesting.
Well, here's what I found interesting from David Icke's book, and I was totally unaware of this. I've heard about the Gnostic Christians ever since I picked up my first Bible back around 1970 or somewhere around in there. But the thing I was not aware of was the Gnostic pagans. It says, David Icke points out that a local peasant at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a town on the banks of the River Nile some 77 miles from Luxor, he had found a sealed jar, and a papyrus was used to preserve it, and he found what was called they were called we were deceived into believing that the only thing that was out there were the Christian Gnostics, but he found works of the pagan Gnostics, not the later Christian Gnostics. And the jar this guy found contained 13 codices and more than 50 texts, which have given us far greater insight of what the Gnostics knew and believed when this stuff was translated. Now, guess what they talked about? They talked about the Archons. And the Archons were a group of reptilians and gray aliens whose only function in life was to distort the holographic projection. And what they did is they would manipulate the senses and affect the direct perception of reality so that people would not get a clear picture of what life is really supposed to be out there. They were in the business of distorting it. And so, like the graves that were found on the Roswell crash, and the reptilians, and right in these writings, it talks about how the demiurge were the ones who were ruling over the Archons, and the Archons were the ones that were part of like the Hebrew Saturn god El and his biblical Elohim, and the Gnostic Lord Archon. The Archons are all the same thing under a different name. And what's interesting is they are capable of really altering reality. And what's an interesting characteristic that I think is very interesting about living in a holographic environment is your perceptions can be so altered, your reality can be so altered, just completely twisted out of what life really is, and you don't even realize it. And a great example that David Icke gave was when there was a hypnotist that had a man and his sister were sitting in the audience, and he brought them up in front of the audience, and he sat the guy down in the chair, and he had his sister stand directly in front of him, and kind of blocking his view, like standing a foot away from him as he sat in the chair, blocking his view so he could not see anything behind him. And then he hypnotized the guy. He says, well, I am hypnotizing you that your sister does not exist. She is not there. And the whole audience is watching this thing, and the guy's sister is standing right in front of him, a foot away, blocking his view. And while this is taking place, another person comes up and does a bunch of things behind his sister's back, out of view from the guy sitting in the chair. I mean, they fold cards and they pour water and they do a bunch of different tricks and things. And the guy, the hypnotist asks the guy, well, tell me what this guy is doing. And he described perfectly exactly everything that the guy was doing behind his sister's back. Well, how could he see it? I mean, how is it possible that he could see what was going on? Even if he was hypnotized, how could he see what was going on behind his sister's back when she was blocking his view? Well, this is a characteristic of the holographic universe. Holographic universe is based on perception, and objects do not block the reality because every part of the whole thing is represented by a small part. So that's why he was able to see what was going on behind his sister's back. And now enter the Archons. The Archons come in, and what they do is they do the same thing as the hypnotist. They are changing everybody's perception into something completely different from what is really taking place on this planet. They are doing all these things that people have no clue. Just like this guy that was being hypnotized, he had no clue that his sister was right in front of him because his reality was altered, his perception of reality was altered by the hypnotist. Now, any comments on that from anybody?
Well, part of that's where your attention is. I tell this story often where I was in tracking school, and we came in this building every day. It was the third day we came in. The teacher was up there on the blackboard, and he said, do you notice anything different? And people looked around. No, nothing different. And then he said, okay, everybody come out. And people were up in the ceiling, down under a bench, around the corner. I mean, in plain sight. But we were so used to coming in with our routine, we didn't look. We stopped looking around because it was familiar. So this is just an example of attention too. There's ways to look at this, and now that's one thing. Like where you put your attention during the day, you can see something but not see it. Every day you walk by a lamppost. I mean, you see it, but you don't. It doesn't register in your brain. So that's kind of a self-hypnosis in a way, or other people can manipulate that so that they can control you through it. So it is an interesting subject. There's a lot of viewpoints you can gain from it.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And the interesting thing about that, though, is that is an example of some people not paying attention to something that's right in front of their face. The thing about the hypnotist is being able to see something, instead of not seeing something that's in front of your face, the hypnotist story is seeing something that being able to see something that's not readily available to see. It's just like kind of the opposite. Now, here's a comment by Michael Elner, and he says that the Archons invert everything. And he says, just look at us. Everything is backwards in society today. He says everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Did you know that doctors manage to kill 140,000 people every year on the operating table? Lawyers destroy justice. I can't tell you of all the stories where I talked one gentleman I talked to down in southern Wisconsin said he used to work for he was an accountant, a top accountant for one of those major corporations, and every time that they would have a big to-do come up in court, they would just talk to the judge and say, meet us in Florida. And he would actually get on the airplane. They'd take a corporate jet down to Fort Lauderdale or Miami or someplace, and they would have suitcases full of cash money, and they would invite the judge over, and they would give the judge suitcases, like $2 million of cash at a time, to rule in the corporation's favor. Another example that Michael Ellner talks about, he says psychiatrists destroy minds. Instead of helping people, psychiatrists destroy minds, scientists destroy truth, and major media destroys information. Instead of telling you the truth, they twist it around and tell you exactly the opposite of what happened. And religions destroy spirituality. You'd think that religions would help spirituality. All they are is dumbed down, spirit-free organizations. It's kind of like a boys' club. It doesn't do anything for you spiritually. They actually destroy spirituality. And Michael Ellner also says governments destroy freedom. Instead of having a government that creates freedom from everybody, they destroy freedom. And that's what these Archons do. And the reason they're able to do that is because we live in our created cause and effect universe is holographic in design. And because it's holographic, they are able to alter and distort reality through affecting our perceptions of everything. Well, I think we've just about run out of time. I've gone way over, and I thank everybody for listening. And I'd like to end the show by everybody doing a new UU together, and then we'll end the show. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll do a new UUU. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. New UUU. Well, thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.